So you want to write great content, whether it's a book, a blog post, an essay, or a speech. You want to impress your audience and make a lasting impact on them through the words you use and create. Now, if that's the case, I've got this unique and new formula which you can use to produce excellent content every time. Welcome to the Escape the System channel. I'm Joe Barnes, and in today's video I'm going to be covering how to write a great speech, blog post or book. Before I start and introduce my 3 S's formula to you, I thought I'd first better outline my credentials. I am an author of 3 books. Escape the System was my first, Do the Work You Love my second, Personal Freedom Manifesto, my third. I also have a blog at my website, Escape the System Now, and one of the blog posts which we're going to be using as an example and focusing on today had over 3,000 social media shares back when my website used to be called ScrewTheSystem.com. I'm also a speaker. I was active in the London personal development speaking scene. I also run my own group called Success Club, which I do a presentation for every single month. So those are my credentials as your tutor in a way today. And I'm your tutor if you are looking to write a good blog post, book, or speech. I'm going to give you something which is universally works across all 3 different formats. And the way you do that is using the 3S formula. Now the S's stand for structure, stories, and soul. Before I explain each of the 3 S's to you, I think it's worth mentioning that I'm referring to non-fiction here. When I talk about writing a great book, it's a great non-fiction book, and the 3S formula is for all non-fiction. So with that being said, let's get into the first S of the 3 S's, which is structure. Now, structure is the way you stop your reader, listener, or viewer from getting lost within whatever you've created. And I'm going to show you an example of how structure is used now from my first book, Escape the System. Okay, so here we have chapter 2 of my book, The System, What It Is and How It Holds You Back. Now, within this chapter, there are 6 elements of structure that I can highlight to you, along with a secret element, which I'll explain at the end. And the 6 elements of structure are sentences, paragraphs, sections, chapters, bullet point, and summaries. First of all, we're going to focus on sentences. And what I want to show you here is the very first paragraph of my second chapter of Escape the System. Now, the rule for sentences is that each sentence should be relevant to the one before. So let's just take a quick look at my first paragraph and see how that works. Okay, so my opening statement is, the system is intangible. Next sentence, it has no central location or power to make and enforce laws. So the first sentence was about the system. Then I make the next sentence relevant by saying it has no central location. So it is obviously the system. So I'm still talking about the system. Third sentence, nobody works for the system and it will never directly compel you to do anything. So I'm still talking about the system. I then, on my fourth sentence, build on what I'm saying by talking about sort of the opposite, but it's still a continuation of the theme of what is the system. So in that paragraph, you can see an example of how each sentence is relevant to the one before. Now, the second element of structure is paragraphs. And much as with the sentences, it's the same rule. Each paragraph must be relevant to the one before. And you can see with my example here, where I finished the first paragraph saying, instead, it's a subtler power, and rather than direct coercion, it operates through influence. I then begin the next paragraph by saying this influence is exerted through a belief system, a wide spectrum of ideas, opinions, and thoughts that define our reality. So I use the same word in 2 follow-on sentences. It operates through influence, and then in the next paragraph, I talk about this influence. That links the 2 paragraphs and therefore makes them relevant. And this is what you want to do when you structure your paragraphs. You make each one follow on or build or develop upon a point you've made in the previous paragraph. Now, the third element of structure is sections and section headings. Now, similar to the previous two, sentences and paragraphs, but slightly different in the fact that they don't have to be directly relevant to the end paragraph of the previous section, but they must build on the previous section. There must be a sense of continuity, or that you can take the narrative of the chapter in a slightly different direction, but it's got to be building on what you've said before. So in my first section of my second chapter, I explain what the system is. And then as I go through and I scroll through, you can see that in the second section, which we have right here, the Maverick Doctor highlighted, I'm now telling a story. I'm now giving an example of how the system operates. By using that as an example, the story, I think it's of Patch Adams. Then I go into another story, challenging the system, the story of Galileo. So still talking about the system, I'm building on what I had in my first section, building on the story of the Maverick Doctor. Now I'm talking about what happens when you challenge the system through Galileo's story. I then start talking about the system striking back. So obviously Galileo challenged the system. So I'm building on that, and now I'm saying the system strikes back. This is what happens if you challenge the system. The pressure to conform. Again, I'm talking about how the system makes us conform to its agreed set of ways of behaving and its outlook. So once again, I'm building. I could go on and on with this. I don't need to. I think you probably get the point. The fourth element to structure are chapters. Now, I must make a quick distinction here. Chapters do not apply to writing blog posts, and they do not apply to writing speeches. They only apply to writing books. But with the chapters, you have more license to take it in a slightly different direction. Sentences and paragraphs really strict. Sections, you've got a bit more freedom. Chapters, you've got even more freedom to go in a new direction. But at the same time, you want to tell a story. Even though this is non-fiction writing, you want there to be a coherent narrative or story throughout the book, which you can see with my context section with Escape the System. We start with the introduction, the awakening, your journey begins. So it's the very early stages. Then I talk about the system, what you're facing, what you're essentially your antagonist, setting up the enemy, what you're facing. So now you're aware of that. How do you find your path through life? Chapter 3. Now chapter 4 builds on that a little bit. Then I move slightly in a different direction, which chapters allow you the freedom to do so, because then we're going to talk about why your beliefs determine everything. But through every single one of these chapters, we're exploring some aspect of what you will need to do to escape the system. So they're still all within the context of the book. So I have 2 chapters on belief there, 5 and 6. And again, by 7, I make a little bit of a jump. I talk about something which I refer to as soul power, which is a secret to your happiness and success. And I can do that because it's a chapter, but I'm still within the context in the book. And that's what you've got to remember with your chapters. Now, the 5th element of structure is bullet points. Now, this is something that might be a little difficult to use in a speech, unless you have a PowerPoint or some kind of presentation. But when it comes to your blog posts and writing your book, and especially probably blog posts, you do want to include bullet points, because when you're writing paragraph after paragraph and lots of text, there is a tendency for some important points you're trying to make to get lost within the paragraph and the text. So if you really want to highlight something that the reader can focus on, then you can draw it out with some bullet points. I wouldn't necessarily do this in every section I'm writing in a book. Maybe I'll do it once in a chapter, but I would use it sparingly when it comes to writing a book. With a blog post, you can use it more often because people are expecting more of that when they read a blog post. There are lots of lists, so it can be a very good way to make the text stand out. Okay, so the 6th element of structure, and the last one that I'm going to be able to show you using my book, is summaries. Now you'll see here right at the end of the chapter, I give a sort of summary section. The title is Escaping the System. The chapter was about the system, and I'm giving a sort of overview of what the system is, how it stands as an obstacle in your way, and what you can do when you free your mind from it. So without repeating what was in the chapter, which is really important, I'm giving the reader a summary of what they've read, and then also talking about what is going to come up next. And you can see there the top of this paragraph in the bold text. The next part of the book will instruct you on how to use this key. So I'm letting the reader know where they are within the book. Now, when it comes to writing summaries, you can do it in a text format like I did just then, or you can use bullet points to make your point clear at the end of the chapter. And using a summary ties in quite nicely to my seventh and final point of structure. Summary is something you don't have to use. Some readers like it because they like to know the key points from each chapter, or the key points at the end of a blog post, or just to go back over the key points at the end of the speech. So be aware, quite a lot of your audience will want some kind of summary, but you don't have to use it, because the seventh element of structure is something you need to be aware of, and that is really try to avoid repeating yourself. So if you are going to write a summary, as I mentioned with my one, try to make it discussing the themes, but slightly new material. If you use bullet points, then yes, you can probably repeat one or two of the points you made within the chapter or the blog post, but just do it in a much more concise and shorter fashion. Throughout your entire book, blog post, or speech, you don't want to repeat yourself. It's not necessary. You are perhaps boring the audience or the reader. You want to be as snappy, as sharp as possible when you're making your points, when you're building on your narrative. So that's how you use structure. In summary, you want to keep the reader completely engaged with what you're writing, so that the book or speech seems to flow seamlessly, and they don't have to do any thinking about where they are within the book or the speech. It's all there for them, so they can remain in the moment and don't have to switch their mind on to think, oh, what did he say a minute ago? How is this relevant to that? Where am I? Oh, I'm a bit lost now. That is avoided by having a clear structure to whatever you write. And once you've got that in place, then you can get into the real juice, and that's the stories, the second of our 3 S's, which we'll move on to now. So the second of our 3 S's is stories. Now, stories are what brings the point you're trying to make to life. They entertain the audience and they stick in their mind. If you were just to try to make a series of, say, 10 points in a blog post you were writing, or 50 points in a book you were writing, or covering 3 topics in a speech you were giving, and you didn't include any stories, it's very likely that you would turn your listeners off. You could have the best, the most wisest, the most cutting edge material possible, but if you don't intersperse it with some stories, then you're going to find that you lose your audience's attention. Now, the example I've chose to illustrate the point I'm making here is Simon Sinek's excellent TED Talk, Start With Why, or How Great Leaders Inspire Action. Now, I'm going to play it at a point where he introduces a story to reinforce the point he's been making before. This talk is all about I think he calls it the golden circle: why, how, and what. And in the previous part of the talk, which I'm not going to show you, he's been outlining his theory, basically. His theory is that people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So you've got to communicate your why with your audience and your customer in order for them to buy from you. And now, to illustrate the point he's making, he's going to tell a story. So I'm going to play the video here and just simply react to what he's saying.
Again, the goal is not just to sell people who need what you have. The goal is to sell to people who believe what you believe. The goal is not just to hire people who need a job. It's to hire people who believe what you believe.
So he's made a point there. That's the point he's making, and now he illustrates it with a story.
And nowhere else is there a better example of this than with the Wright brothers. Most people don't know about Samuel Pierpont Langley. And back in the early 20th century, the pursuit of powered man flight was like the .com of the day. Everybody was trying it. And Samuel Pierpont Langley had what we assume to be the recipe for success. I mean, even now, you ask people, why did your product or why did your company fail? And people always give you the same permutation of the same three things. Undercapitalized, the wrong people, bad market conditions. It's always the same three things. So let's explore that. Samuel Pierpont Langley was given $50,000 by the War Department to figure out this flying machine. Money was no problem. He held a seat at Harvard and worked at the Smithsonian and was extremely well connected. He knew all the big minds of the day. He hired the best minds money could find, and the market conditions were fantastic. The New York Times followed him around everywhere, and everyone was rooting for Langley. And how come we've never heard of Samuel Pierpont Langley? A few hundred miles away in Dayton, Ohio, Orville and Wilbur Wright. They had none of what we consider to be the recipe for success. They had no money. They paid for their dream with the proceeds from their bicycle shop. Not a single person on the Wright brothers' team had a college education, not even Orville or Wilbur. And the New York Times followed them around nowhere.
So he continues to tell the story, and I've stopped it there. You were probably getting right into it, and that kind of illustrates the point I'm trying to make. By telling these stories, you really draw your readers or your listeners in to whatever it is you want to say. And after they've listened to your speech, after they've read your book or read your blog post, what's going to stick with them is probably not so much the points you were making, is the stories you were telling. So really, you just have to find an appropriate story for the point you're making. And when I say stories, as Sinek demonstrated there, it was a story from history. It doesn't always have to be a story from history. It could be an example, a story from a film. It could be a story from sports. Or you can even cite research. I know research doesn't necessarily count as a story in a completely strict and technical way, but I would still put that under the story category. You're still bringing something from external to the point you're making. You're bringing it in to your book, your speech, your blog post, and using it as an example of the point you're trying to make. And research can be excellent for doing that. So we've got a few sources: other books, movies, other blog posts, from stories from history, stories from your personal life as well. That's a really big one. Personal experiences. So you've made a point that you're trying to get across to your reader, and you back it up with a story, a highly personal story of something that you've experienced and encountered in your life, and added to that, obviously, research as well. So those are the various different ways you can access or use stories to make your point. But remember, without a story, whatever you're doing, you could have the best delivery, you could have the most intelligent points, it'll always be a little dry. So do try to include those stories. So the last of our three S's is soul. And on the surface, this may appear to be the least clear of all the three S's. What do I mean by soul? Well, what I really mean is you've got to include something in your book, blog post, or speech that really hits the person in the gut, that gets them on an emotional level, that inspires them to want to take action or change something. That's the whole purpose of including soul in your speech, talk, or blog post. Now, you usually include the soul at the end of a point you're making, and the structure is very simple. It goes like this: you make a point, you tell a story, you hit them with some soul. You hit them with something you're going to say which is going to really inspire or motivate them. Now let's take a quick look at an example from my most popular blog post. Okay, so here we have my most popular blog post: self-improvement is masturbation, Tyler Durden's 3 rules for an exciting life. I'm explaining rule number 1: stop trying to control your life. I give the main body of the explanation here and here, and then you see with the blue at the end, I finish with some soul. And this is the point I'm trying to make, to get the reader to react or to think or take some kind of action. So I'm saying right at the end, then throw yourself headlong into your dream and be open to making mistakes. A path will emerge, but you have to let it lead you. And you can hear while I'm speaking that sentence to you that my tone somewhat changes. And especially if you're delivering a speech, when you're delivering the soulful section, the meaningful part, your tone will change. You're wanting to try to stir some emotions in your listeners and your audience through that part at the end, which is really aimed at connecting with them. And again, you'll see for every section I've done, rule number 2, we finish with the soul at the end. Finally, the final rule. Again, I finish off with some soul at the end. And you'll see, you'll see here, I put it in capitals, do whatever it takes to feel alive. Now, that's a bit of a, it's a bit sort of corny. It's not very sophisticated. You'll recognize that the other points I was making were a little more sophisticated. And the one I make here at the end is as well. But do whatever it takes to feel alive is just a simple call to action. And it's okay to include things like that. And if you were in a speech, again, you would alter your tone to get the point across. But don't overuse those capitals or just direct calls to action. Try to make your soul more sophisticated. So in this one, I say this comes above and beyond making money. So here I'm getting people to think, because usually most people's mindset is that money is so important. Money is going to direct and lead all the decisions I make. And here I'm challenging that. So that's another good way to introduce soul and thought-provoking content, is to challenge conventional wisdom. And then I go on to say, if there's a decision you have to take that makes financial sense but will lead to a duller life, then don't do it. The energy you live with is worth way more than the amount of money in the bank. So again, I'm making a point which is going to stop them for the moment, pause them for a moment, and maybe challenge their own thinking, challenge the way they've been living their life, and potentially get them to change. That is the purpose of soul, and that's why you must include it in most of the points you want to make. Now, you may be wondering, is there a sort of ratio I can use? Is there a correct way to balance these 3 S's to use them most effectively? Now, the answer to that is yes. Clearly, structure is the thing that underlines everything. So that's always got to be there. But whatever you're doing, whether it's books, speeches, or blog posts, you're essentially making a point, telling a story, hitting them with something impactful at the end. And you can just repeat that again and again and again. Make a point, tell a story, or cite some research, hit them with something impactful, which is planned or designed to get them to change or inspire them. And you just do that over and over. And the sort of correct, or the ratio that you want to use, is probably 60% making points, 30% telling stories, 10% impactful, soulful sentence or speech right at the end. Don't try and go over the top with the soul, because it will just become a bit too much for the reader and the audience. And they may even start to feel that they're being manipulated, as if you're trying to make them feel a certain way. So keep it, limit your soul. Less is more when it comes to soul. Finally, if you can add the 4th S, the secret S, into your formula, you are probably going to take yourself to the superstar level of speaker or writer. The 4th S, in some respects, is the hardest to pull off, because there's no real formula or process way by which you can achieve it, but it's something that happens with time. It's something that occurs when you learn to connect with your authentic voice, and you become truly comfortable and confident in your writing and speaking. And that 4th S is smiles. Now, what do I mean by smiles? Smiles is just a way of saying potentially physically smile, yes, or laugh, laughter, or just to get people entertained by who you are. And who you are can come out in your speech. It can also come out in your writing. And this is what the true masters do. And I'm going to give you a quick example of that right now. Okay, so here's my final example of somebody being able to deliver smiles in their speech. But it's not just smiles. You get to see the whole process, all of the 3 things brought together: making a point, telling a story, emotionally connecting with your audience. So I'm going to again react to this video. I'm going to let it roll and then make the points as they present themselves. This is Rick Rigsby's commencement
The wisest
speech.
person I ever met in my life. A 3rd grade dropouts. Wisest and dropout in the same sentence is rather oxymoronic. Like jumbo shrimp.
And you hear he can get a laugh from the audience with that. And it was the thing with smiles when you're trying to entertain people is that it can't be forced. It has to be something natural that comes to you, the kind of thing you would say in your day-to-day life when you're making a joke to a friend. It can't be, you can't try to script jokes into your speech or what you're writing and hope that they're going to entertain people or make them laugh, because it can come across as somewhat forced. So my best advice is, if you're not confident with this fourth S, just stick with the 3 S's, master that completely, and you'll be giving 9 out of 10 speeches, 9 out of 10 books, 9 out of 10 blog posts. But the 10 out of 10 can come, and it will come, when you get more confident with your writing and your speaking, and when you're completely relaxed and at ease with your audience.
Like Fun Run. Ain't nothing fun about it. Like Microsoft Works. Y'all don't hear me. I used to say like country music, but I've lived in Texas so long, I love country music now. I hunt, I fish, I have cowboy boots and cowboy. Y'all, I'm a black neck redneck. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? No longer oxymoronic for me to say country music. And it's not oxymoronic for me to say 3rd grade and dropout. That 3rd grade dropout, the wisest person I ever met in my life, who taught me to combine knowledge and wisdom to make an impact, was my father. A simple...
So what he's here doing here now, after entertaining the audience to start with, he's making a point that a 3rd grade dropout can still be a very wise and intelligent man. He's made his point. Now he's going to tell his story. The story is about his father.
Cook. Wisest man I ever met in my life. Just a simple cook. Left school in the 3rd grade to help out on the family farm, but just because he left school doesn't mean his education stopped. Mark Twain once said, "I've never allowed my schooling to get in the way of my education." My father taught himself how to read, taught himself how to write, decided in the midst of Jim Crowism, as America was breathing the last gasp of the Civil War, my father decided he was going to stand and be a man. Not a black man, not a brown man, not a white man, but a man.
There's the emotional connection. You see, he tells a story about his dad and then makes the point. You know, in our world, it's all about divisions or identifying as a certain color or whatever it might be. You know, there's so much identity politics going around, and this man there stands there that says that his father was above all of that. He was something greater. You couldn't categorize him. And that is the thing which emotionally connects with the audience. You can see there in the background, that man was laughing at his jokes a lot, but now he's feeling what Rick Rigsby is saying. And you can see with his body language there, you know, the hand held up. It was a powerful moment. Okay, well, that brings this presentation to an end. I hope you've got something from it. I hope you found it useful. If you have, please consider liking the video or subscribing to the channel. If you want to follow up on what I've said, if you feel like you want me to help you or tutor you or mentor you through this process, then you can contact me via my email address, which is in the description below. So thanks again for watching. Have a great day, and I will see you in the next video.